So today in this video, we're going to continue building the new True Sound Studios, and I'm going to show you guys how I built these, my quadratic diffusers.
True Sound Studios is in your ears.
So guys, welcome back to the Building the New True Sound Studios. I'm Weezna, and we are inside of my fully finished now studio. But I'm going to show you guys how I built these quadratic diffusers. Now, these are different from like your scattering diffuser where there is no necessary math involved and you kind of get a, I don't know, I don't want to, it's not like they're not good. It's just a quadratic diffuser is just very predictable. Each well depth, depending on the width and how deep it is, actually reflects back a certain frequency or range of frequencies. So these are very, I guess you would say, calculated. You can just really figure out exactly what your space needs, you know, whether it be a control room like I'm using here. All my monitors, my studio monitors are facing this way. So this is actually the back of the studio. There's a whole bunch of different things that we're going to talk about with quadratic diffusers and how to put them, and I'm going to give you guys a little insight on how to do it. But first, let's just go ahead and let me show you guys exactly how I built these. After I show you how I built them, then we can get into talking about where to place them, distance that you need, and the different variations. So first, right off the bat, how I got all these dimensions for this quadratic diffuser, this whole thing back here, and also the one that is in my vocal booth. We're going to jump over to the computer and check out a website that actually did all these calculations for me. Then we can go ahead and actually physically build them. Okay, so we're just going to go on Google, just type in quadratic diffuser calculator, and it's the very first one. It's www.digitalaudiorock.com. How they got that out of it, I don't know. So anyways, down here there's this little box, and this is where you're going to enter in all these numbers. So the width was that 1x2, which, like I said, was actually 1.5 inches. The depth, how deep it is going to be the 5.5 inches because like I said, I had framed it out with a, I don't know if I told you guys, I framed it out with a 2x6. 2x6 is actually 1.5 inches by 5.5 inches. So if we hit calculate, you can see right here, these are the results. So we have the first depth is 0, so meaning all the way out. The next one is 1 3/8 deep. The next one is 5.5 inches deep, so all the way. And then 2 3/4, 2 3/4, 5.5, and 1 3/8. And then if we look, it says the approximate frequency range is 704 to 4520. So that's a, you know, that's a pretty it's a pretty good frequency response for these. That's it's not super wide. It's not like it goes from the lowest lows to the super highs, but you know, there's a lot of critical information in there, all your like mid lows and all your mids. So yeah, so that is how I got these dimensions for the quadratic diffusers. That's the ones just for this control room though. The one for the vocal booth is slightly different, but I'll show you guys that later on. And then last, before we start these, the material list. If you're going to build these exactly the same size and dimensions as I built them, for the frames, you're going to need 2 8-foot long pieces of 1x6 pine. You're going to need almost an entire 4x8 foot sheet of Luan, which is also known as Underlayment, which is just almost a 1/4 inch thick, just a big sheet of, it's not plywood, but it's wood. And then for all the wells, you're going to need 1x2 pine, 8 feet long, and per like one block, one 4-foot by 4-foot block, I actually used 9 of those. So you'll need 9 8-foot long pieces of 1x2. Now you can buy the ones that I bought, which are already pre-primed, they're already white, or you can just buy the natural ones and maybe you can make them look nicer than mine. All right, let's build this thing. Okay, so we're starting off here with 1x6 pine, which means the actual dimensions is 3/4 inch by 5.5 inches deep. So that's how thick the frames of these are going to be, and also that's also going to be the same thickness as our wells. So the depth of the well, how far down the sound will go at its maximum depth, is going to be 5.5 inches. And you know, these have already been pre-cut. My opening is actually 48 by 48. It's actually just a bit bigger than that, but that's what my opening is. And so I just cut all this lumber so that it would fit into a 48 by 48 inch opening. There's actually going to be 2 of these, and you can see right here, I'm just simply taking some wood screws and screwing them together. And just, you know, make sure when you build these that they're pretty strong, because they're going to be heavy. So right here I have some Luan, which is a very thin piece of wood. It's maybe a 1/4 inch thick, and I cut them into 5.5 inch wide strips. So 5.5 inches, because once again, that is the total depth, the full depth of this quadratic diffuser. And then this right here, this is pine. These are primed 1x2s, so that's a 1.5 inch, and that's 3/4 inch. And what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be attaching the 1x2s to the Luan strips, these thin strips of wood. And you can see that's roughly what it's going to be like when it's done, except there's going to be different depths on depending on which exact well it's for. And you can see here, I'm just grabbing a tape measure. The first one is 1 3/8 inches, so I'm just marking 1 3/8 inches on there. You can see that's what it looks like, because the piece of wood has to be 1 3/8 inches down, and that's where it starts. And then I'm just simply using a brad nailer and brad nailing them in place. Now you can see these are the 3 different well depths. So the first one is 2 3/4 inch deep. The second ones are 1 3/8 inches deep. And the last one is, I guess, a negative well depth. So it's all the way forward. You can see here, this is the 2 3/4. And obviously you just want to make sure you mark which side is correct, because when you start putting these together, it gets a little confusing if things aren't accurately marked. But you can see this is what it looks like, you know, fully put together after it's all been brad nailed together, which is at least my preferred method. I'm sure somebody else can think of something different. But you can see here, I'm just pointing out which is the top side. So that is the 1 3/8 inches. That's how the pattern goes, and I'm just slipping them in there. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab a speed square, because I just want to make sure that by the time we get to the very end of these, that they're not, you know, slanted at anything more than a 90-degree angle. I don't know if that affects the sound of the quadratic diffuser, but I would have some guess that it probably would. So once again, just going ahead and brad nailing these into place. Now that very first one is the only one that you get to put as many brads in, because as you see here in a little bit, you get to some of these wells that are much deeper, and you can't get a brad nailer in. You can only nail it, or you could screw it in too if you wanted to, but from the very edge, like I'm doing right there. That is all I'm able to do on some of them, is just put 2 brads at the very end of it. Now, if you're going to use a brad nailer or a pin nailer or even a finish nailer like I am, just make sure that your brads aren't too long, because this is, if you're going to buy pine like I did, it's usually very knotty. And if a brad hits a knot, that brad will come right through and really screw up to this design, because then you'll have to cut the brad off and, you know, fix the damage that it does. So putting the third one in here, and this one is the 2 3/4. You can see this one fits a little tight. Also, a good thing to mention is to make sure your frames are really plumb and square and true and all that, so that you don't, you know, as you get further and further down, it doesn't start to squeeze every piece, and now you have to start cutting things. It's probably a little safer just to cut them a smidge short. All these wells. But see that one right there, I was only able to put 4 brads in, 2 on each side. That's it. That's all you can nail some of these. Now that is actually the next well right there, that is the exact same well depth. Now I don't quite understand how, you know, the quadratic formula picks that, because to me that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's what the formula says. So I just went ahead and did. You can see now we're back at the full height of the well, so 5.5 inches forward. That's as far forward as any of these wells will be. And then right here, this is a matching one. That's the 1 3/8. So you can see now how well it looks. And right here, quick thing I'm just doing is measuring to make sure that one side isn't, you know, much different in measurement the other. So once again, so you don't get to the end and you have a 5-inch gap and the other gap on the other end is 4 inches or whatever. So here, this is the full well depth. And this is where it gets a little tricky because now you have to use some sort of spacer like I'm using right there to make sure we keep the same, same width of the well the whole way through. So I'm just placing those. Now those aren't going to get nailed in or anything. But I'm nailing in that well. It's almost like an opposite piece now. You won't see it this second, but you'll see soon that well goes all the way through. It's a full depth. But now that we're flipping these backwards, just because of the way I did it, now you have to nail just a totally blank piece in. But the nails kind of go through this Luan like super easily. So I'm switching over. That little red nailer is actually a stapler. So the staple helps to not allow the nail to rip right through that Luan because that stuff is thin. It's kind of, sometimes it almost feels like balsa wood. It's so light. So you can see here, see that well, right? The third one from the right, that goes all the way through. You can see the floor right through it. So in this particular design, you want to make sure you paint the back wall. And then you can see here, these are 3 prime 7 diffusers built into this one. Okay, so I was talking about that space that I didn't have enough, actually physical room to put a 4th prime 7 diffuser in there. So what I did was I took another piece of pine and kind of separated it, made sure all the spacing was right. And then I took some 1x2s and made an inner frame. You can see that's the white part. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and take some fabric and just simply staple it on there to make a small absorber at the very end of this panel. And that was really the best thing I could come up with to fill in that space. And you can see here, this is the final look of this. I went ahead and spray painted it with 2 coats of white. And I just want to warn you guys, you might want to actually just paint these before you assemble them because it was really tough spray painting in the middle of those wells. And then here, I didn't really film this, but this is the quadratic diffuser that I put into the vocal booth. And in a little bit, I will go ahead and just briefly talk about that. Okay, so now you guys have seen me build these quadratic diffusers. Now, I'm sure you guys just kind of fast forward through all this. I'm sure you guys are going to ask me, where to put them, how big, all that. So I actually don't have, there's nothing that I know of that you could just say, oh, you just use a prime 11 if this is the situation. I don't. So I just simply, I emailed a bunch of studio designers who were really into quadratic diffusion and finally got one response back that I paid him for his information, and he picked out this prime 7 diffusers with this sequence, how many to put here and how big they should be. So I wish I could help you guys out further. I personally don't know how to actually figure this out. Now, the one that I put in the vocal booth, I never really asked about. I just kind of used the information that I thought would be correct to build that one in the vocal booth. I feel like that one has less of an effect because it's recording. This being a mixing space, it's so much more critical. So, I mean, in the vocal booth, you could simply turn the mic around to have it be more or less effective in the room. But for this, being the fact that my studio monitors are pointing here, this is the back wall, it's a big, it's a big thing to have in a room because this could actually really negatively affect the room. So I would just recommend going and trying to finding somebody. Now, I already went and asked the person who helped me out if I could give out their name and say that they would help people, but he very quickly said no. So I tried. So now another thing to keep in mind is the actual sitting position to where these diffusers actually are in your room. Now for mine, it's roughly 12 feet from where I sit to this back wall is the distance, which is technically like just barely enough to have that distance, because it has something to do with when the sound hits these diffusers and it scatters. If you're too close, you are going to hear, or I'm not really 100% sure, but all I know is there needs to be a good distance from that sitting position to where it is, especially if you're going to put it on your side walls. And if your side walls are even closer together, it could actually be kind of negative, have a negative effect to your listening position. In fact, Ethan Weiner has a video on he's all over YouTube. He does a lot of small room acoustics, and he says that in a small room, absorption seems to work better. So in a small room, you just might want to go with absorption, but if you have a little bit bigger space like I do, like a medium-sized room, this is only like 4x4 and this is a 4x4 area, so it's not huge based on the whole, how many boundary surfaces are actually in this particular room. So I guess, the best case scenario, just ask a studio designer or ask somebody that has some experience, and hopefully they can help you out. But at least I showed you guys what I think is a really good way of building these quadratic diffusers. Now, just quickly to talk about the vocal booth. So this quadratic diffuser is also a Prime 7 quadratic diffuser, except for a couple different things. I didn't use 1x2s. This time I used 1x3s. And because of just how I framed this out, I was actually able to get another 1/2 inch of depth on it. So if I just pull this up real quick. So the max well depth is actually 6 inches for this one. And the width being 2.5 inches changes the entire frequency response of this thing. So now this one is 646 hertz up to 2712 hertz. So that really changes the frequency response quite a bit. But the good part about that is when I'm working with a vocalist and I'm doing my recording and or mixing, that frequency range is kind of what I'm boosting or cutting depending on the singer. But I thought it's a really good kind of safe option to build a quadratic diffuser for vocal booth. Now, just one really quick thing to mention, on the quadratic diffusers in the control room, I had that small section that I just couldn't fit another whole series of quadratic diffusion. So on this one, I had the same problem. I had one extra well on either side, and what I did is I took the same thin pieces of wood and I just kind of bent it into an arc. So it's kind of like a scattering diffuser at the very end, just that last well width. So just figured I'd mention that just in case you guys were wondering. So okay, so there you guys go. That is everything that I have on quadratic diffusers. And if you've watched my other videos on how I built all my acoustic panels, which I will link in the bottom in the description, and you guys can check that out too if you're interested. But I do want to say thank you to everybody, and there's so many people who gave me such incredible support while I was building this whole studio. I mean, I feel like I have a new family of people that I don't even know. So if you were one of those people who sent a nice comment or whatever, I really appreciate it. With that being said, the studio is 100% fully open. Still got more videos to show you guys on how I built this. It's just been a little slow because I've had so much work and, just trying to make a little bit of money now instead of just constantly spend it. I also finished my house, for anybody who cares. I was building a house at the same time I built the studio by myself. And yeah, so that's done. So I'm really getting back to everything, which means I'm back to recording and mainly mixing and mastering. And I also do produce tracks, but mainly the mixing and mastering is really the thing that I do. It's all online, so you can record at home, send me your tracks, keep things extremely affordable. I understand that being in music is, more of a hobby that you would like to turn into a career. And I appreciate that. And I understand that it's not food, it's not rent. This is something that is extra in life. So I try to keep my prices very fair so that you can have, you know, somebody like myself work on your track and make it sound even better. So if you guys are interested, go ahead and email me. All the info is below in the description. Also, go ahead and find me on Instagram. If you ask me a question on Instagram, I 100% promise that I will respond back. I respond back to everybody on Instagram. Go ahead, send me a DM. And we can also talk and share pictures and a whole bunch of things. It's a great way to have a good two-way conversation. Besides that, guys, you know, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So thank you for watching this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, click that like button and consider subscribing for more content. So not only do I make YouTube videos, but I also produce tracks and I can mix and master your music. So once again, thank you for watching this video. I'm Weezna, and True Sound Studios is in your ears.